and he said he had never seen a day like this. The Palestinian Red Crescent had deployed 58 ambulances yesterday in Gaza, and it wasn't enough to carry the wounded. They started using their administrative cars to ferry people back and forth to hospitals.
But I'm here also as a Christian minister to grieve over the fact that earlier this morning, as I was leaving the house, I learned that a 12-year-old boy had been shot and killed.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Maine to New York City. Democracy Now! Has done some excellent reporting on the Israeli bloodbath in the Gaza Strip. Sherif Abdel Kouddous, who you recall did fine reporting in 2011 about the Egyptian uprising, made this report for Democracy Now!
In the background now, there's some youths burning tires, and just on your left you'll see some mounds, and those sand mounds are where Israeli sniper nests are. I don't know if you can see the canopies or not. There's a much smaller turnout today. Very few people have actually come today, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But so that's where a lot of the people were shot, were kind of closer to the border area. But many people were shot not close, and many people were killed far away as well. So where I am standing, people were shot and killed. And Leila Al-Ghandour, an 8-month-old child, was probably around where I was, according to her family. Her uncle was holding her in his arms. They were watching from far away what was going on. And an Israeli drone came above them and dropped tear gas in the area where they were. And she eventually died of suffocation. She turned blue. They took her to the children's hospital initially, and then she died there. They took her to Shifa Hospital, but couldn't revive her. And of course, there was wails of grief today in the house as her small body was wrapped in a Palestinian flag and taken out of the house to the graveyard. There's also Yazan Al-Tobesi, a 24-year-old young man, like so many young men here, who couldn't find work, was unemployed, came every week, every Friday to the protests here to, his family says, to express his rights and to make, to send his message to the world that Gaza needs to be free. He was shot, they said, about 100 yards away from the border fence, and the shot hit him in the right eye, and he died on the spot. And there's also Alaa Sawafiri, who is 25 years old. She was actually shot the day before, very far away, so, near one of the main tents. She was hit in the stomach, and she's now fighting for her life. And she actually has a speech impediment, the result of her mother, when she was pregnant with her, inhaling a lot of tear gas 25 years ago here in Gaza, which caused complications with the pregnancy. So she was injured, in the womb, and now she's fighting for her life 25 years later after being struck with a bullet. We went to Shifa Hospital later in the day when the crowd started to leave, and it was just a scene of utter chaos. The hospital itself was just bursting at the seams. This is the largest hospital in Gaza, and there was blood. The floor was slippery with blood. There was just dozens and dozens of men and boys shot, many of them in their legs, wincing and screaming in pain. I spoke to a doctor who had worked there for 17 years, and he said he had never seen a day like this. The Palestinian Red Crescent had deployed 58 ambulances yesterday in Gaza, and it wasn't enough to carry the wounded. They started using their administrative cars to ferry people back and forth to hospitals and try and give them care. So it was really a devastating day.
Sherif,
go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, in terms of the distance between the line of Israeli soldiers and the actual protesters, could you give us a sense of how far apart they are? Because obviously Israel is claiming that their soldiers are in danger. They're also claiming that Hamas is using the protests to insert armed fighters into Israeli territory. Could you respond to those claims as well, from what you can tell?
Well, let me just show you what it looks like. So just over here to my right, you can see these the borders right there. And I don't know if you can see this mound. The cameraman should be focusing on one of them, and that's where the snipers are. So there's three sets of fences. Barbed wire that's set up, and then two more, and then the main fence, and then you have these, these snipers there. So many of the people who are approaching and getting close, they'll get really close to the first piece of barbed wire. A lot of them try and put hooks on it and pull it away. They fling using slings and slingshots. They try and fire on the soldiers. But I would say most of those people are more than 50 yards away, and they're throwing rocks at these soldiers. Some people do manage to cross. They cross in, but even then, no one has any guns. They have either a Molotov cocktail or a rock, and really, it's very hard to imagine how any of them pose an imminent threat to life to any soldier. And the evidence of this is that not a single soldier has been injured. And honestly, a lot of these people who were shot, as I mentioned before, weren't shot up at the fence. A large number were. I myself saw when I approached near the first set of barbed wire, people being shot just standing there. Someone was shot where I'm standing right now, who was just facing and looking. So, there's a lot of talk of this being clashes and so forth, but there wasn't really clashes. There was no real threat to the other side as far as I could see.
So, Sherif, can you talk about this coming together of today, the 70th anniversary of what's known as the Nakba, and if you can explain that word in Arabic for catastrophe, and the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, sort of ceremonial, because, in fact, it's not opening there right now. It remains in Tel Aviv as they build it.
Right. Today is the 70th anniversary to what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba. Nakba in Arabic means catastrophe. And it marked the moment when, something like 720 or 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced from their homes to Gaza, to here, to the West Bank, and to countries like Lebanon and Jordan and Syria. And for 70 years, they have called for the right to return. There's a UN resolution that ensures their right to return. And for 70 years, they've been denied that right. There's 1.9 million Palestinians living in Gaza right now. 1.3 of them are refugees. They're recognized as refugees by the United Nations. There are 8 sprawling refugee camps here, which have been here for decades. So the right to return is something that is at the very core of the Palestinian issue, of the Palestinian national project, of the Palestinian cause. And that's why they called these marches the Great March of Return. And the idea was to do a protest where they walk up to the border and they said, we will implement our right ourselves. We will cut the wires and we will cross. Some people did, in fact, try and cut the wires, and they did cross. And they would quickly go back. A lot of them were shot when they did. But this was an attempt because after decades of negotiations have brought them nothing except bigger prisons and just something of a garrison state that they're living under, not even a state. So this was a key issue why this began this all began on March 30th, which is Land Day in Palestine, and it has continued every week. It's a lot of these issues are coming together here. It's the 70th anniversary of what they call the Nakba, calling for the right of return. It's the transfer of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and the feeling that the Jerusalem becoming the capital of Israel is trying to be forcefully implemented. And of course, it's about the siege in Gaza, which has gone on for 11 years and has made life utterly intolerable here. Jerusalem is very important to people here. Many of them have never been to Jerusalem. They can't go. They can't really go anywhere. Many of them have never left Gaza.
This is a photo of Laila al-Gandour. This is the 8-month-old infant in her burial robes. The Israeli soldiers killed her on May 14th with so-called tear gas. That day, thousands of Palestinians gathered in Arafat Square in Ramallah and proceeded to march to the Kalandia checkpoint to confront Israeli forces. They were tear-gassed and 40 people were overcome. These gases certainly can be lethal. About that same number, 40, died of tear gas in the 80s during the first Intifada. The biggest protest in outrage of these killings on May 14th was held in, of all places, Sana'a, Yemen, a country being ravaged by the Saudi princes and the U.S. In Tel Aviv, hundreds demonstrated right in the belly of the apartheid beast. In Washington, D.C., the Jewish group If Not Now blocked a street and constructed what they called an embassy of freedom. Heavy rain did not stop a rally in New York City. These are signs with names of the dead and flowers. In New Haven, we had a demonstration on the steps of the Federal Building, and then a walk to the offices of Congresswoman DeLauro, who has not said one word of public criticism of the Israeli government.
Okay.
We're people of many faiths and beliefs. Christians, Jews, Muslims, people of no formal religion. But we're united with the idea that Palestinians are human beings. Imagine having to say something like that in this day and age. Well, today's news is awful. All these people getting killed and injured, and they're doing it without, it's not a war. If you were in Israel and listened to their media, you would think that they were engaged in a war, but there is no war going on. These are civilians at incredible risks trying to go up to the fence that encloses them. The rows of barbed wire, the electric fences, the concrete barriers, and the mounds of earth that Caterpillar bulldozers have pushed up to make convenient places for snipers to stand on. Many of them carrying Connecticut weapons, made perhaps 30 or 40 miles from here in Southport.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. Normally, when we have such a massacre as we had today, over 50 more Palestinians murdered by Israeli snipers, in addition to the over 40 that have been killed, shot, murdered by Israeli snipers over the last 6 weeks, each Friday, adding to the totals. Normally we would ask for a moment of silence, but today is not a day for silence. Today is a day to let our voices be heard. In fact, our government has been far too silent when it comes to this issue. Our government has the tools to impress upon Israel that this madness of killing innocent protesters must stop. We give Israel as a nation $3.8 billion per year. Our nation has stood up 43 times at the United Nations to shield them from legitimate criticisms aimed at ending the occupation, legitimate criticisms aimed at ending the increasing settlement movement that continues to annex more land. The criticisms, legitimate criticisms, to end the siege of Gaza, the blockade of Gaza, which has caused so much human suffering there. In Gaza now, as a result of Israel's blockade, they're in critically short supply of water, of medicines, of housing, of all of the basics needed for life. In fact, the UN has stated that by 2020, Gaza will be unlivable. And where is the voice of our government in all this time? Our voice of our government continues to side with the state of Israel as it continues this occupation, as it continues this blockade, as it continues taking land, displacing and dispossessing the Palestinians, and not giving them their basic human rights.
We all know that the two major products of American society are violence and irony. Both of these were on major display today in Israel with the slaughter of unarmed Palestinian demonstrators at the Gaza border, and then
Maybe you should put it closer to your mouth.
and then with the dedication of the new American embassy in the city of Jerusalem. Hypocrisy was on particular display in the fact that two evangelical Christian ministers were present to bless this dedication. We know that Christianity has a long history of being used as a justification for crimes that the gospel itself condemns. But these ministers, one of whom promised Donald Trump political immortality if he made the decision to move the embassy, were there to give a veneer of religious legitimacy to this unjustified act, denying the Palestinian people their rights to land and self-governance. At the end of the benediction, John Chaffee, Baptist minister from Dallas, invoked Jesus, Prince of Peace. An interesting invocation in front of a crowd that one would think was at least largely Jewish.
Our Savior, Lord Jesus Christ, Prince of Peace.
Indeed.
Quote unquote.
So this, again, this disguise for the madness runs across many traditions. And I think any of us, even those without a particular faith, should be appalled by both the arrogance and indifference of these kinds of prayers. I'd like to end because with a voice other than my own, because I think there should be a Palestinian voice here today. So I brought with me a brief poem by a Palestinian poet. The Song of Becoming by Fadwa Tuqwan, translated by Naomi Shihab Nye. They're only boys who used to frolic and play, releasing in the western wind their blue, red, green kites, the color of the rainbow, jumping, whistling, exchanging spontaneous jokes and laughter, fencing with branches, assuming the roles of great heroes in history. They've grown suddenly now, grown more than the years of a lifetime, grown, merged with a secret word of love, carried its letters like a Bible or a Quran, read in whispers. They've grown more than the years of a lifetime, become the trees plunging deep into the earth and soaring high towards the sun. They're now the voice that rejects. They're the dialectics of destruction and building anew. The anger burning on the fringes of a blocked horizon, invading classrooms, streets, city quarters, centering on the squares and facing sullen tanks with a stream of stones. With plain rejection, they now shake the gallows of the dawn, assailing the night and its deluge. They've grown more than the years of a lifetime, become the worshipped and the worshiper. With their torn limbs merged with the stuff of our earth, they became a legend. They grew and became the bridge. They grew and became larger than all poetry. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here as a Christian minister, and I'm holding a sign from Jewish Voice for Peace. And I'm proud to be in partnership and solidarity with all of our friends at Jewish Voice for Peace and our friends in the Muslim community who, as Ali said, are beginning Ramadan today. Thank you. But I'm here also as a Christian minister to grieve over the fact that earlier this morning, as I was leaving the house, I learned that a 12-year-old boy had been shot and killed. I'm here to grieve that he was joined by a number of other young people from Gaza who are struggling in their march of return, struggling for justice and struggling for human rights. And the snipers up there have taken so many lives, too many lives. I'm here to be in solidarity with all those in Palestine who yearn for their right of return and are engaging in the march. But we also as a country are engaged in a march, or at least we should be. A march to restore decency and humanity to our system of government. This, in the Christian year, this week is a special week in that last Sunday was the seventh Sunday in our season of Easter, and next Sunday is Pentecost Sunday, which is supposed to be the celebration of the birthday of the church. One of my favorite thinkers from South Georgia is a man by the name of Clarence Jordan, who said that the proof of Easter is not a rolled away stone, but rather a carried away church. And I have to say that I'm here to grieve. I'm embarrassed by how silent the church is. Instead of being a demonstration for how love is greater than hate, a demonstration for how hope is greater than despair, instead of being a demonstration place for how working for justice and human rights is more important than hiding out in our little church buildings, the church is doing just the opposite. Instead of having a few tens of us here today, there should be thousands of us marching in our right of return to human decency and to being the kind of country we know we should be and we could be. I'm embarrassed by the fact that we have Christian ministers who are over there celebrating the removal of the embassy to Jerusalem. I'm embarrassed by those who think that what we are doing is being done in the name of Christianity. So we're also on a march. We're on a march to return, a march to be in solidarity with all of our Palestinian and our Israeli friends who are struggling for justice. And it's so important for us as Jews and Muslims and Christians and those of no particular faith orientation to be in solidarity with one another as we join together with that very small minority worldwide who feel that this is a very important issue for us to try to address. I've been over in the home of the Tamimi family in Nabi Saleh. Many of you have seen the pictures of Ahed Tamimi. She's joined by literally hundreds, thousands of other Palestinians, young people, children who have been incarcerated by military courts. And they're yearning to have solidarity with us as we work for justice. We have much work that is to be done. Part of the Christian narrative, it starts up in the mount in Bethany, where Jesus came down the hill and looked out over the Mount of Olives, and then came down the Kidron Valley and entered into the city of Jerusalem. And as he was going down there to confront the authorities, both the Roman authorities and the ecclesiastical authorities, the crowd was getting quite boisterous, and the authorities said, "Quiet down." And Jesus said, "If these were quiet, the very stones would cry out." The people in Palestine speak of the living stones. And those are the Jews and Christians and Muslims and those of no particular faith orientation who are doing that. They're crying out for justice, crying out for human rights. And we need to show ourselves that we are the living stones as well. I can't help but notice the beautiful green across the way where the church is there. And I think back to the late 1960s when William Sloane Coffin was the chaplain at Yale. And out here on the green, the Black Panthers were having a demonstration. And it was a very volatile situation. But the church was involved in that. William Sloane Coffin and another number of the others that were part of the chaplaincy at Yale were leading people down to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge to take part in the demonstrations in Selma, Alabama. Where are the churches nowadays? Why aren't there thousands of church members out here in the streets marching for a right of return? Not only for our Palestinian friends, but for the right of American people to restore decency and humanity and compassion and justice to our country. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
And then over to Congresswoman DeLauro's office. She had issued a statement criticizing Trump over Jerusalem, but nothing about the 60 Israeli killings in Gaza.
I'm from UConn, I'm a student, and I'm very energized to be here because what's going on in Palestine is really, really disgraceful. This is so reminiscent of what happened in apartheid South Africa. And we need to keep on believing that this human rights crisis, this genocide will end, because the will of the people is unstoppable. I believe the Palestinian people will have justice, and we need to keep on showing our solidarity. Thank you all for showing up today.
Yes.
Main Voices for Palestinian Rights announces that on Friday the 25th, it's planning a mock drama on Monument Square in Portland to dramatize the number of people being killed or maimed by Israel. Finally, a last notice of the meeting on Monday the 21st in Brooklyn, now renamed From Syria to Palestine, the Struggle for Justice. See pepeace.org for details. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.